Good evening, welcome to the program. The government has continued to struggle this week to sell its unpopular budget. Its arguments in favour of some of these specific unpopular cuts may have been slightly stronger in Parliament. However, it continues to be undermined, this whole effort of selling its message, by own goal distractions. There were revelations over fundraisers in Speaker Bronwyn Bishop's office. There was talk of a taxpayer-funded ad campaign that had to be ruled out by the Prime Minister. And then today, confusion, mixed messages over whether the government would be reclaiming unpaid HECS debts from dead people. Now, there may be some hypocrisy in Labor's criticism of specific budget items, but at the moment it's having an absolute field day, ripping into the government over what this budget's going to do to pensioners, to students, to families, to talk about how the budget sales job is going and the specifics of some of these particular budget measures. We're joined tonight by the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, Rowan Dean, columnist with the Australian Financial Review, Sean Kelly, a former advisor to Labor Prime Ministers Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, and the Shadow Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus. Welcome to you all. Josh Frydenberg, first to you. How do you think, seriously, the budget sales job is going?
Look, we've got a bit of work to do, there's no doubt about that, and we'll wait and see what transpires in the Senate, because that's where it counts. We don't have a problem.
Public opinion counts here too, though.
Sure it does, but I think we've got a good message to sell, David. It's a two-pronged strategy in this budget. First, we're paying back Labor's debt. On the Treasury numbers, we'll pay back nearly $300 billion of Labor's debt over the next 10 years. We're reducing the budget deficit from $49.9 billion today to just $2.8 billion in 2017-18. The second key message is about productivity, growth and jobs. And we've got record investment in infrastructure, record investment in education and innovation, particularly through the Medical Research Future Fund, and of course we're boosting participation for over 50s, under 30s and for women.
When you say you've got a bit of work to do, what do you mean?
Well, look, Labor, as you said in your introduction, have been very hypocritical here. I mean, the problem is for Labor is that in the past they've supported indexation on fuel excise.
I'm talking about the government. When it comes to selling this budget, what more do you need to do that you're not doing?
Well, look, take, for example, the Medicare co-payments. We think that is a reasonable message. Not only protects the sustainability of Medicare over the long term, which is important, but it's also investing in the Research Future Fund. When it comes to pensions, when the pension first came in 1908, the life expectancy was 64.
Yeah, but
today, the life expectancy is...
You're giving me the lines here, Josh Frydenberg.
Well, I'm giving you the evidence, actually.
No. I was asking about what you just said at the outset, that you do have a bit of work to do in selling this budget.
Yeah. Look,
you can do a better job as well.
Because, I mean, David, I think it's fair to say some with the debt and deficit that was left to us by our political predecessors, then the burden on future generations will be even that much greater. So we have to make the case, and we are doing, I think Joe Hockey, by the way, and Tony Abbott are doing a very good job. We can continue to do better. But I think we have to make the case that this is in the long-term interest of the Australian public.
Right. Well, I'll come back to you on some of this, Josh Frydenberg. Rowan Dean, how do you think?
Well, it's too late to sell the budget. The time to sell the budget was before the budget, because then people look forward to it. And in fact, a lot of what the Liberal Party had done in the lead-up was the right thing to do. The whole idea of the age of entitlement, ending the age of entitlement, people bought into that. People bought into the fact that Labor had left a mess in terms of too much debt, too much deficit. Our kids will be paying this off for years to come. So they actually had a good story to tell. The problem was, I think, that they missed their opportunity. There are too many muddied signals came out of the budget. You know, the cure for cancer suddenly popped up out of nowhere. All maybe politically sensible, but in terms of a simple, single-minded communications message, they dropped the ball on.
And is it too late now?
It's too late to now try and patch that up. Now, the budget will speak for itself. It will live and die on how good it is. Now, it is a good budget. There's lots of good things in it. It is starting, it's not going far enough, but it is starting to redress the horrible debt that Labor have left, and people will start to realise that. The budget will sell itself, basically, because it is sound.
Isn't it true that this government needs every spare day it has to actually make the case for this budget? And David made the point right at the outset. It's own goal after own goal after own goal. And not just trivial things like the wink or the dance or the cigar, but a government which actually doesn't know its policies, a Prime Minister who can go on radio and doesn't know his own policies about education funding, or a Treasurer who can go on, who also messed up on education funding this morning. A government that doesn't know what is in its own budget is going to have an enormous amount of difficulty selling it.
But
that's the
point,
fundamental problem.
Sean, it doesn't have to sell it. It's going to, you know, we're now past that phase.
Sure,
Business leaders are now coming out and saying, you politicians, will you just back off now? Just let us get on with it. Get this thing through Parliament so our business and our finance and our economics can get on with getting the job done, which is getting back out of this position we're in.
On that note, let me bring in Mark Drake. Has Labor now settled what it's going to do with all of the budget measures?
We've said very clearly that we're going to oppose, and we've listed a whole range of measures that we say are dreadfully unfair. We think this is a very unfair budget, and we've said that we are going to oppose those that are still left on the table. We don't know where the government's going to go in its negotiation with Palmer. I think business is actually picking up Rowan's point. They've given up on this government's ability to explain their own budget. It's been an extraordinary performance over the last 2 weeks.
Well, they've actually given up on Labor's opposing this budget.
On the contrary.
No, because they want to see it get through and let it live or die on its own measures, rather than being opposed and stuck with Palmer, of all people, to be deciding the fate of this country. How can Labor sit there like that?
Clive Palmer was elected by the Australian people to serve in the Australian Parliament, and his colleagues in the Senate were elected by the Australian people to serve in the Senate.
Yes, and Tony Abbott was elected to fix up Labor's mess.
I don't think so. I think Tony Abbott was elected on a whole lot of promises which he's now broken. Rowan.
What you've got, David, is you've got a whole series of external bodies, whether it's the International Monetary Fund saying that Australia's spending is the highest among 17 developed economies throughout the world, whether it's the Parliamentary Budget Office who's saying that we do have a spending problem, or it's also the Commission of Audit, which said business as usual is not an option. So all these external players with credibility in the economic space are saying we have to do structural reform.
Just on that, I mean, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who was appointed by Labor, Phil Bowen, this week did agree, as Josh Frydenberg says, that the spending growth is the problem here. It may not be an immediate emergency, were his words, but nor is it fiction.
And that's really important.
No, but he's made the point we need to take action.
He's actually made it very clear that just how concocted Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey's
you can't take in isolation
supposed
that
emergency
line, because he has said we need to do something about the spending problem now because it is growing, as the OECD points out, faster than any comparable OECD country.
The first fiscal statement made by this government, the Mid-Year Economic and Fiscal Outlook, concocted by changing all of the assumptions, removing the cap, and it's the wrong comparison that's being made. The comparison that needs to be made is between this budget and the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook, not with the mid-year statement that Joe Hockey brought down in December, which gave $8.8 billion to the Reserve Bank when they hadn't asked for it, removed all the caps and changed all the assumptions, and they're now making this comparison. They double the deficit. Okay, that's their double deficit.
To be clear, the Parliamentary Budget Officer is wrong?
No, I'm not saying the Parliamentary Budget Officer is wrong. Under no circumstances. He's right when he said there isn't this concocted emergency.
And is he right when he says we need to do something about the trajectory of spending growth?
All governments need to do something about spending at all times, and
but
that's
yours
why.
Didn't.
Nonsense, Rowan, and that's where you're wrong. We kept under the 2% cap we had in growth cap.
Let me ask you about one specific budget measure, family payments, which is a big part of our federal budget. What is Labor's position on whether family payments should still go to those on more than $100,000 a year?
Our position is that the changes that are proposed by this government, right, I'm not going to talk theoretically, the changes that are proposed by this government to, for example, family tax benefit Part B, which would see, for example, a single mother on around $40,000 a year lose $6,000 a year if she's got a child over 6.
But I'm asking specifically about the change that's been proposed in the budget to means test family tax benefit Part B at $100,000 instead of $150,000 where it is at the moment. Should those between $100,000 and $150,000 still get family payments?
Oh, we think that they should, and we think that you've got to look at people who are in need.
So Labor will oppose that means test.
Well, I'm not going to say specifically about that one. I'm going to say about the change to the family tax benefit.
No, but I'm asking you about this specific change. It's proposed in the budget. Should people on more than $100,000 receive family payments?
I think that we need to take care of people who are in need of family assistance.
And
I think
are
we
they
need
really-
to take.
I mean,
it depends
really
on their
in need?
circumstances, and that's why we have means testing. It depends on the number of children we have. This idea that the Abbott government's come up with, that as soon as a child turns 6, all of a sudden the family's got no expenses to worry about, is just a nonsense. And that's why this budget is full of unfair burdens. There's no fairness in this
Sean,
budget.
let me ask
it's been
you-
imposed unfairly on low and middle income
Let me ask
people.
you about this, because Labor in government did put in means tests on this and a bunch of
lot
other
of them,
things.
absolutely.
Do you think they should be backing a means test down to $100,000 for family payments?
Look, I think this is probably one of the few things that Labor could afford to look at, but I think it is worth looking at the budget as a whole. And when we are talking about family benefits, which overwhelmingly flow to the poorest in our society, it is worth noting that the bottom fifth of income earners in this country will lose $2.9 billion over the next 4 years. The top fifth will lose $1.7 billion over the last 4 years. Now, that equation to me seems like it's the wrong way around. And I think that's actually what people are reacting to in this budget, David. I mean, broken promises aside...
But when you say that, though, you've got to factor in, haven't you, how much benefit that bottom 20% get compared to how much benefit that top section gets.
And I think it is worth thinking at this point about the things which the Liberals have caved in on to the higher income earners. Things like superannuation concessions to people who earn a lot from superannuation, a measure that Labor took and which the Liberals have rolled over on.
And so is Labor, by the way.
And I absolutely think that those concessions should be removed.
Do you, Mark Dreyfus?
We have had a range of revenue measures that this government abandoned in the superannuation area as soon as they came to office. That's one of the extraordinary...
They're for low-income earners. I'm talking here about...
No, both. We had a measure for low-income earners which gave a tax rebate to low-income earners, people under $30,000 to make sure that their superannuation balances grew.
What about the tax
and
breaks
we had
for the
a
rich?
revenue measure which this government took away that would have affected only about 15,000 of the superannuation funds in
But
this
hang on,
country.
didn't Labor take it away prior to the election?
On the contrary, the measure that was in our 2013 budget was to impose tax on the earnings over $100,000 in superannuation funds. And there's only about 15,000 funds that are in that category. You have to have about $2 million in your superannuation
And you'd still like
fund.
to do that?
That was in our 2013 budget, but this government has already abandoned that. That's the strange thing about this government. They're happy to abandon revenue measures when it doesn't suit their interests, and quite happy to impose new ones even when it's a broken promise.
Can I just say, there is great hypocrisy by the Labor Party here. When you talked about family tax benefits in 2009-10, Jenny Macklin and Wayne Swan changed the indexation for family tax benefits away from male average weekly earnings to the CPI, what we're trying to do now on the pensions. When you were in government, you actually lifted the pension age from 65 to 67.
Cutting in 2023.
And we're talking about cutting in 2035.
At 70, and we don't agree with that.
When you were in power, you introduced co-payments for the PBS. Now you're complaining that you can't introduce a co-payment for Medicare. When you were in power, you introduced excise indexation for fuel excise.
The Liberals too have contradicted themselves on each of these fronts over the years as well. You can't deny that. I can put
they're opposing.
your Minister Kevin
It's not about us. You're the government, I'm afraid, Josh. And it's your problem.
They're actually opposing $5 billion worth of savings they took to the last election, and now they're in opposition. They're actually opposing them in the Senate. So
It's not about 25 years ago, David. It's about what Tony
9 months
and
ago.
Joe Hockey said just before the election, which was no changes to Medicare, no new taxes, no cuts to health and education, and every single one of those promises
The pension. Sure. Okay, you want to change the way the pension rises from male total average weekly earnings to a slightly smaller or a smaller measure, the CPI inflation index. Now, that's what Labor did with family payments.
And they're very different kinds of payments. This is the whole of the aged pension. If this change to indexation had applied over the last 4 years, pensioners would be $1,500 a year worse off.
Do you accept that it is different because pensioners live on the pension?
Well,
those on the full pension.
principle's the same, because if you look at the Hansard, back when Wayne Swan defended these changes, he said it was all about the sustainability of those payments. And so too with the pension. You see 4 out of every 5 Australians over the age of 65 are on either a full or a part pension. pension. Today, the government is spending $40 billion a year, 10% of government spending on the pension. And you know as well as I do, David, that we have an ageing population. So today, we have 5 working Australians to every 1 retired person. That goes down to 2.7 to 1 by 2050. This is the demographic challenge that we're facing.
All of this was known before the election.
But this is what the Commission of Audit, Mark, this is what the Commission of Audit spelt out in detail. These are the top public servants who have looked at this issue, and they have said you can't go on as business as usual. So we're brave enough.
Do you accept the pension does need to change in some way?
The pension has changed already because we've said that in 2023 you will not be able to receive the pension until you are 67, and it's going to cut in gradually. We don't think, however, it should be put up to 70. We think that's a sufficient change.
Is that
this is part of the Australian compact.
The bottom line is really simple. You guys had 6 years during the biggest boom in Australia's history.
Global financial crisis.
Great.
Well,
and
no,
you
don't say
Peter Costello.
I need to hear from you about the global.
If you believe that having a surplus is so important, when the next crisis comes around, you spent all the money and you've committed us to $667 billion of debt into the future. Now,
you spend all the money.
Make the books balance during the good times. When the next bad times come, you all lot have no solutions. You are not prepared to tackle the welfare state. To Sean's point, 50% of people in this country take more from the government than they put into it. It's not sustainable. We're heading towards European status. You guys are in denial. It's hilarious for you guys. It's not hilarious for our children who are going to be living in an economy. Well, that's what the OECD says. That's what the OECD says, that we're going to be European within 10 years because of the settlement.
Whenever anybody in Australian public life refers to the other lot as you lot, you know, we're not really talking about a nuanced debate here. No, don't say everybody on the Labor side believes in one straight thing. I completely agree that
we must stop spending.
I don't disagree with you, Rowan. Huge changes need to happen at both an expenditure level and a revenue level. And,
what are Labor's
I would argue,
solutions?
and I've said it on this show before, that both sides are failing to grapple with the revenue issues facing this country. Well, for a start, there's a carbon tax, and I personally believe there should be a stronger mining tax. In addition, I think it's inevitable at this point.
So you'd like to tax everyone rather than cutting spending?
Revenue is half of it. Revenue absolutely needs to rise, and every economist in the country has said that, Rowan. We all need to face up to that.
Sorry, says who?
And expenditure does as well. I personally don't have a problem with raising the pension age to 70. What I do have a problem with is the huge expenditure cuts to family benefits that fall disproportionately on the poor of this country when the rich are being left alone or hit with temporary taxes only. A freeze on parliamentarians' pay, a deficit levy, both of them which vanish.
So, Sean, you just want to see more taxes, you're not prepared to tackle spending.
I don't want to see an inequitable budget.
Before we go to a break, I want to come back to where we started, and that is some of the own goals we've seen from the government this week. What happened today with that HECS issue about whether you would be reclaiming debts from dead people?
Well, the Prime Minister made it very clear in question time today that we're not going to be pursuing the families of deceased persons for their HECS date. I mean, that's the end of the matter.
After the Education Minister and the Treasurer said they thought it was a good idea in the morning.
Well, to be fair to both Chris Pyne and Joe Hockey, they also made it clear that the government has no plans to do this.
Neither of them said that.
But is it a good idea? I mean, Joe Hockey's argument, it shouldn't be different to any other loan. It's only against the estate of the individual. It's not going to be across families and so on. He says, look, that's the same as any other loan, any other mortgage we have in our lives. It wouldn't be any different. Is he right or wrong?
Well, look, we're just not going to go down that path, and we've decided that if somebody does have a HECS loan and they are deceased, then that wouldn't be pursued. I think that's fair. I mean, 80% of students end up paying their full amount of HECS, and there are 750,000 university students in Australia.
So why did the Treasurer, of all people, say that this morning, that we're not going to do it?
Well, because Tony Abbott made that point very clear in question time.
Later,
in the same day.
So this is the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
The point is very simple.
Hang on, Rowan, you're a communications expert on this as well.
Of course Joe Hockey is right, and of course they should be taking the money off the dead people. This is the party that gave money to dead people.
The Prime Minister disagrees with the Treasurer.
So we may as well take it back.
I tend to agree with Rowan. I don't think, across the board, but surely there are cases where if people have an outstanding debt to a bank, it has to come out of the estate instead of getting passed on to the, those who are going to inherit the money. If it's a debt to the taxpayer, why not? Sure.
Of course.
I think the difference here is partly a compassionate one. You're talking largely about 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds who will have been struck down when they are very young.
Yeah, I agree. That's the exemption. But if it's somebody,
So where do you cut it out? You say once somebody hits 30 that their death is less meaningful. I think it becomes very difficult, and I think the Prime Minister was right on this. What's really worrying though is that this is the second time within 2 weeks that the government haven't been on the same page at the top levels.
Well, Sean, Wayne Swan promised a surplus 600 times, including one day announced in Parliament. Tonight I'm introducing 4 nights of surpluses. So, if you want to separate facts and fiction, let's look at the...
At least everybody was committing to surpluses at the same time.
That's true. Look, we're going to take a break. After that, I want to talk about this GP code payments. If you're watching Sky News early today, you would have seen Michael Kroger saying the government should just drop this now. We'll discuss that. Stay with us.